Welcome, dear listener, to Candlelight Mysteries, where every whisper hides a truth and every shadow conceals a secret. Tonight, as the wind sighs against the glass and the flame trembles low, we invite you into another tale of suspense and candlelight. Let the mystery begin. The rain came softly at first, a delicate mist that veiled the rooftops of St. Mary Mead in a gauze of melancholy. Then, as if some invisible grief had deepened, it turned into a steady, rhythmic downpour, drumming upon the rose-petalled paths and whispering secrets through the hedgerows. The lamps flickered in the narrow lanes, their light shimmering on the puddles that mirrored the empty windows of sleeping cottages. Inside the Bluebell cottage, a clock chimed 10. Its echo lingered, faint yet distinct, in the hush that followed, like the heartbeat of time itself. On the oak writing desk near the lace-curtained window lay a letter, neatly folded, sealed with violet wax, and scented faintly with lavender. The scent was unmistakable. The delicate perfume used only by Mrs. Eleanor Braithwaite, a widow of refinement and certain social consequence in the village. Her handwriting, graceful and exacting, sprawled across the envelope in soft violet ink. To be opened upon my death. No one in St. Mary Mead could have imagined that by dawn Eleanor Braithwaite would be found dead, her expression serene, as if she had slipped away into sleep. Yet something in the stillness of that room spoke not of peace, but of silence too carefully arranged. The maid, Lily Parsons, discovered her at first light. She had entered to draw the curtains, humming some trivial tune, when the smell of lavender struck her more strongly than usual, too strong, almost cloying. Then her eyes fell upon the figure on the chaise longue, Mrs. Braithwaite, pale as paper, her hand still holding a small sprig of lavender pressed between her fingers. The doctor was summoned, of course, and murmured something about a weak heart. A tragedy, but not unexpected at her age. The vicar nodded solemnly. The neighbours whispered sympathetically, and soon enough the talk would have drifted away, had it not been for the letter. For on that same morning Miss Jane Marple, while tending to her sweet peas at the edge of her garden, received a small brown envelope, damp from the rain, bearing the faint trace of lavender perfume. Inside was a folded sheet of ivory paper, written in that same elegant violet ink. My dear Miss Marple, if this reaches you, it means that I am dead. There are things that cannot die with me, things I cannot tell anyone else. You alone may understand. The truth lies hidden where the lavender grows. Yours in secrecy, Eleanor Braithwaite. Miss Marple stood quite still for a long moment, the soft drizzle seeping into her shawl. Then, with a quiet sigh, she looked toward the west, where the Braithwaite estate rose beyond the elms, its windows dark against the grey sky. The lavender bushes there would soon be in bloom, and in their gentle fragrance, it seemed, a secret was waiting to be found. The clock in her sitting-room struck 11. Miss Marple folded the letter once more, her eyes gleaming beneath the fine brim of her hat. Where the lavender grows, she murmured. Yes, that is where the truth must lie. And as the rain fell harder, it seemed that the village itself was holding its breath. In St. Mary Mead, death had come dressed in the scent of lavender. Apta. The following morning dawned crisp and silver-grey, as if the rain had polished every leaf, every cobblestone, into something too clean, too quiet. Overhead, the church bells tolled softly for morning prayers, their echo carrying over damp hedgerows and the thatched roofs of St. Mary Mead. In her small sitting-room, Miss Marple stirred her tea thoughtfully, her eyes fixed upon the letter that lay open on the lace-covered table. The scent of lavender still clung to it faintly, as though the ink itself had absorbed the perfume of its writer. The handwriting, graceful, deliberate, was unmistakably that of Eleanor Braithwaite, whom Miss Marple had last seen only a week ago at the vicarage garden fete, fussing gently over the flower arrangements and complaining that the roses were a shade too red to be genteel. But now Eleanor was gone, suddenly, according to the doctor. Miss Marple, however, had lived too long and observed too much to believe entirely in sudden deaths. She placed her teacup down with a delicate clink and reached for her shawl. "There is," she murmured softly to herself, "a certain unnaturalness in nature when death comes too quietly." The Braithwaite estate stood on the northern edge of the village, beyond a long winding lane lined with hedges and old lilac trees. When Miss Marple arrived, the place looked as though it had sunk into mourning itself. The curtains drawn, the gravel drive still wet with last night's rain, and a sense of hush that felt almost deliberate. At the door stood Inspector Crail, a man whose manner was more suited to burglary than to delicate social tragedy. His boots were muddy, his overcoat damp, and his expression betrayed both irritation and curiosity when Miss Marple appeared at the gate. "Good morning, Inspector," Miss Marple greeted with that mild, unthreatening courtesy that often disarmed even the most hardened of men. "Morning, Miss Marple. Didn't expect to see you out so early." "I am always early, Inspector. The day reveals much to those who meet it before breakfast." Crail gave a snort that might have been amusement. "You've heard, I take it, about Mrs. Braithwaite?" Miss Marple inclined her head. "I received a letter from her yesterday evening. Or perhaps after she was already dead." The inspector frowned. "A letter? What kind of letter?" "One written in lavender ink." For a brief moment, Crail looked nonplussed. "Ink? Well, that's peculiar, I suppose." He rubbed his chin. "You better come in, then. Though I warn you, the doctor says it was her heart." "Nothing for us to do here." "Nothing," said Miss Marple mildly, "is so dangerous as assuming there is nothing inside." The drawing-room smelled faintly of violets, wax polish and something else, lavender again, stronger now, as though the very air had been steeped in it. The fire had burned low in the grate, casting a faint reddish glow upon the ornate picture frames and porcelain figurines that decorated the mantel. On the chaise long lay a folded shawl, pale lilac in colour, and beside it a small porcelain dish containing a crushed sprig of lavender. Miss Marple's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in every detail: the faint scuff on the carpet near the window, a cup of untouched tea on the side table, and a book open on the armchair, collected poems of Christina Rossetti. "Peaceful, isn't it?" said Inspector Crail. "If you ask me, she died as she lived, tidy and proper to the end." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the cup. "Peaceful, yes." "But not untroubled. The maid, Lily Parsons, entered then, her face pale, her hands twisting the corner of her apron. "Beg pardon, sir, I only came to fetch the doctor's bag." He left it on the sideboard. Miss Marple gave her a kind smile. "You were the one who found Mrs. Braithwaite, were you not?" "Yes, ma'am," Lily whispered. "I went in to draw the curtains, and she was there, so quiet, like she was dreaming. I called out, but she didn't stir. Then I saw her hand, it looked so white, and I knew." Her eyes filled with tears, and Miss Marple touched her arm gently. "You did just right, my dear. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual before that?" "Any visitors, perhaps?" Lily hesitated. "Well, there was someone last evening, after supper." "I didn't see who it was." "I was upstairs in the linen room, but I heard voices. Quiet, like they didn't want to be heard. Mrs. Braithwaite told me she'd see to it herself. She never let me open the door when she was expecting." "Certain people? Certain people?" Crail repeated sharply. "You mean she had secret visitors?" Lily shook her head nervously. "Not secret, sir, just private." "She was a lady with many acquaintances," Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And after the visitor left?" "I don't rightly know, ma'am. I went up to bed. The rain had started by then." "I didn't hear anyone go." "Thank you, Lily," said Miss Marple softly. "You've been very helpful." As the girl curtsied and left, Miss Marple turned once more toward the chaise longue. Her eyes rested upon the folded shawl, and the faint trace of powder on its edge. She leaned closer, her keen eyes narrowing. "Inspector," she said quietly, "would you be so kind as to fetch me that dish of lavender?" Crail obliged somewhat impatiently. "What do you make of it, then?" "A fancy scent and a weak heart, hardly the makings of a mystery." Miss Marple held the dish to the light. The petals were slightly bruised, but there was a faint residue upon them, a pale dusting that glimmered oddly. She dabbed a handkerchief against it, then folded it neatly. "It is always so curious," she murmured, "how death may choose the smallest of disguises." By the time she left the Braithwaite estate, the church bells had ceased, and the sun had risen behind the clouds, pale and uncertain. As Miss Marple walked home along the lane, she could feel the weight of the letter in her pocket and smell the faint trace of lavender that still clung to her gloves. At her gate, she paused and turned, gazing back toward the estate. A blackbird sang from a rooftop, the sound sharp and clean in the morning air. In that moment, Miss Marple knew two things with quiet certainty: that Eleanor Braithwaite had not died of natural causes, and that the truth, whatever it was, would be found among the whispers of lavender. She drew out the letter again and read the final line under her breath. "The truth lies hidden where the lavender grows." Then, tucking it away, she smiled faintly. "And so," she said to herself, "it shall be found." Chapter 10 be the following afternoon, word of Eleanor Braithwaite's passing had settled upon St. Mary Mead like a soft, dismal fog. The village had already begun its quiet rituals of speculation. The grocer's wife whispered of a broken heart, while old Mr. Weatherby declared it must have been her digestion, poor woman. But beneath the polite murmurings a current of unease stirred, for few could quite reconcile the idea of the stately Mrs. Braithwaite dying alone, without ceremony, amid the scent of lavender. Miss Marple, however, was not one to let rumour or appearances obscure the truth. Her manner that morning was serene, but her mind was aflame with quiet calculation. She had arranged to call upon Inspector Crail once more, ostensibly to return a borrowed gardening book, but in truth to inquire further into the case. The inspector, found in his cramped office over the post office, looked up from his paperwork with a resigned sigh. "You again, Miss Marple? You don't rest, do you?" "Rest," she replied pleasantly, "is for the innocent of mind and the guilty of heart." "Neither apply to me, I'm afraid." Crail gave her a wry look. "Well, the doctor's confirmed it. Heart failure. He's seen her records. Nothing suspicious." "Indeed?" Miss Marple murmured. "And yet I wonder, was it the heart that failed first, or the truth that failed to appear?" He groaned softly. "Oh, I know that tone." "You've found something, haven't you?" "I have found," she said delicately, "that lavender, when crushed, releases a scent most charming and most capable of concealing other odours. Arsenic, for instance, has a bitter trace that can be masked rather well by such perfume." Crail's head shot up. "Poison, perhaps, or perhaps only the whisper of it. I shall not accuse until I am certain. But Mrs. Braithwaite's letter, and the peculiar powder on that sprig of lavender, suggest that something has been carefully hidden." The inspector leaned back, sceptical but uneasy. "All right, I'll humour you. Where do you suggest we start?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Where the lavender grows, of course." The Braithwaite garden stretched behind the house in long, manicured rows of flowers, roses, peonies, and, at the far edge, a hedge of lavender that bordered the orchard. The scent hung heavy in the mild air as Miss Marple and Inspector Crail stepped down the gravel path. The bees hummed lazily between the blooms. It might have been a picture of serenity, were it not for the faint feeling that the garden itself was watching, waiting. Lily Parsons stood by the gate, her hands clasped her eyes red from crying.
"I don't like coming here now, ma'am," she said softly.
It feels strange without her.
She used to spend every evening by the lavender, said it soothed her nerves. Indeed.
Miss Marple bent to examine the roots. And did she often have company? Lily hesitated. Sometimes, yes. Mr. Geoffrey came most evenings. Crail frowned. Mr. Geoffrey?
A stepson, sir.
From the Colonel's first marriage. He lives up at the lodge, though he's not been much liked. Always borrowing money, always short of prospects. Miss Marple's eyes flickered.
And yet his company was tolerated?
More than tolerated, Lily whispered. She doted on him, poor fool. Said he reminded her of the Colonel. Remembrance, Miss Marple murmured, brushing her fingers lightly across the lavender, is often a dangerous sentiment. Crail gave her a look.
You think the stepson had reason to want her dead?
Miss Marple's gaze wandered to the far edge of the garden, where a small stone bench sat half hidden under the trees. Reason is seldom simple, Inspector. Let us speak with Mr. Geoffrey before reason becomes gossip. Geoffrey Braithwaite received them in his cottage with the charm of a man who had long practised the art of polite deceit. His hair was dishevelled, his tie loose, and his eyes bore the restless gleam of sleeplessness. Yet he smiled as though they were old acquaintances. "A dreadful business, Miss Marple," he said, pouring brandy with an unsteady hand.
My stepmother's death. What a shock.
Though between us she was not as robust as she liked to appear. Miss Marple accepted the offered glass, but did not drink. You were close to her, I believe? He hesitated. Close?
Yes, in a way.
She relied upon me for small matters. Repairs, errands, that sort of thing. Financial matters as well? His smile faltered. You have been listening to village chatter, I see. Village chatter, said Miss Marple sweetly, is often more accurate than official reports.
One learns that over time, Crail leaned forward.
Where were you on the night she died, Mr. Braithwaite? Geoffrey stiffened.
At home, of course, alone. I had supper and went to bed.
Surely you don't suspect— No one is suspected, Miss Marple interrupted gently, but everyone is understood. You see, Mrs. Braithwaite wrote me a letter before her death, one she intended for no one else. His expression shifted. Surprise, then wariness.
A letter? What did she say?
Miss Marple studied him for a moment, then said quietly, She spoke of a truth hidden where the lavender grows. His eyes flickered to the window, where a faint breeze stirred the lavender fields beyond. Did she now? Well, she always did like her riddles, Miss Marple smiled faintly.
And you?
Do you like them, Mr. Braithwaite? He drained his brandy. Not particularly. Then you must dislike secrets even more, she said softly. For riddles are only secrets waiting to be solved. That evening, as dusk drew across the village and the first lamps were lit in the cottages, Miss Marple sat in her small parlour with a candle burning beside her. The flame quivered faintly, casting shadows upon her lined but keen face. She laid out before her the objects gathered that day. The lavender sprig, the handkerchief dusted with its residue, and the folded letter. She opened the letter once more, reading the words slowly, savouring each stroke of violet ink. The truth lies hidden where the lavender grows. The handwriting trembled slightly on that final line. Not from fear, Miss Marple thought, but from haste. The scent of lavender, still faint but persistent, rose from the page like a whisper of warning. She leaned back, closing her eyes.
A woman afraid of death does not write a letter.
A woman who expects it, or foresees it, does. Her mind drifted to Eleanor's expression in death. Serene, yes, but too composed, as though she had known what was coming. She thought of Geoffrey's restless eyes, of Lily's frightened whisper, of the doctor's hasty diagnosis. And then, quite suddenly, a memory stirred. An old case long ago involving a widow, a poison, and a bottle disguised as perfume. Miss Marple smiled faintly in the candlelight. "Yes," she murmured, "where the lavender grows."
Indeed, the flame flickered once as if in assent outside.
The night deepened, and in the distance a single owl cried. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple knew the truth was beginning to stir. Quiet.
Unseen but inevitable. Chapter 3. The morning broke pale and uncertain.
The mist curling low over the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead. The village, as ever, went about its quiet rituals. The baker, arranging loaves in his window, the postman whistling his route, the milkman clinking his bottles by the gate. Yet under that placid surface, something had shifted. The air carried a faint tension, an expectation, as though the lavender fields themselves waited to speak. Miss Marple rose before sunrise. She brewed her tea, buttered her toast with steady precision, and set the day's newspaper aside unread. Her thoughts were already elsewhere. On Eleanor Braithwaite, on the faint dust upon that lavender sprig, on the shadows that lingered behind polite smiles. After tidying her table, she slipped on her shawl and hat and stepped into the lane, the letter in her handbag and a quiet determination in her step. She was going, not to the inspector nor to the stepson, but to the one person in the village who she believed knew more than she dared to admit. Mrs. Agatha Temple. Mrs. Temple lived 2 cottages down from the old vicarage, surrounded by climbing roses and the gossip of 20 years. A widow herself, she had been Eleanor Braithwaite's dearest friend, and according to some, her only confidant. When Miss Marple arrived, Mrs. Temple greeted her with visible hesitation.
Jane Marple.
"You do look brisk this morning. I dare say you've come about poor Eleanor." "I have," Miss Marple said gently, taking the offered seat in the parlour. "You were quite close to her, were you not?" Mrs. Temple's hands fidgeted with her handkerchief.
Close enough, I suppose.
Though in recent months she'd become rather secretive.
Nervous even? Nervous?
Yes, always glancing at the post or jumping when the telephone rang. I told her she was fretting herself into illness, but she wouldn't listen. She said, "Oh, I hardly know if I should tell you this. She said someone was watching her." Miss Marple leaned forward. "Did she say who?" Mrs. Temple shook her head. "No, only that she'd made a mistake long ago and that mistakes have a way of returning. Like weeds through lavender," she said once. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Weeds through lavender.
A curious expression, and a telling one. Indeed, sighed Mrs. Temple, and she grew more peculiar as time went on.
Burning letters locking drawers, even forbade Lily from dusting certain rooms. Which rooms do you recall? The Colonel's old study, madame, and the little parlour adjoining it. She said they were not for prying eyes. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Then perhaps that is where I shall begin to pry. By the time Miss Marple returned to the Braithwaite estate, Inspector Crail was already there, frowning over his notebook. "Back again, are you? I might have known." "Indeed, Inspector," she replied mildly, "and I fear I shall be a regular visitor until the truth decides to present itself." He groaned. "What now?" "The study," she said. "I should like to see it." The study was a narrow room smelling faintly of ink and old leather. The Colonel's portrait hung above the mantel, his painted eyes stern beneath his greying moustache. A writing desk sat by the window, its surface orderly, save for a scattering of unopened letters tied with a faded ribbon. Miss Marple examined it with delicate fingers, sliding open drawers one by one. Most were filled with papers, bills, receipts, correspondence, all unremarkable. But in the last drawer she paused. The lining felt uneven. She tapped lightly, and a hollow sound replied. "Ah," she murmured.
A false bottom.
The Colonel, I suspect, was a man of discretion. With a hairpin deftly applied, the panel lifted, revealing a small packet tied in silk ribbon, faintly scented with lavender. Inside were several old letters, all written in the same violet ink. Inspector Crail peered over her shoulder. "More letters?"
What do they say?
Miss Marple unfolded the topmost page. "My dearest Eleanor, you must destroy all traces of our correspondence. If it were to fall into wrong hands, neither of us could escape scandal. Remember, discretion is our only safety. Yours forever." R.H. Crail whistled softly.
A lover?
Miss Marple's expression did not change. Perhaps, or perhaps merely a confidant.
But what is more curious, she said, drawing another letter from the packet, is that this one is not old at all.
The ink is fresh. And look here, the handwriting. Crail squinted. It's the same as Geoffrey Braithwaite's. Miss Marple folded the letter neatly. Precisely. The initials differ, but the style of the hand does not lie. And the contents, though worded differently, speak of the same tone: dependence, secrecy, fear. Crail frowned deeply. "So you think the stepson was blackmailing her?" "I think," said Miss Marple softly, "that love, money, and fear make a trinity most capable of murder." That afternoon, Miss Marple returned alone to the lavender hedge at the garden's edge. The air was still, the scent stronger now beneath the rising sun. She walked slowly between the rows, her hand brushing the blossoms, her eyes scanning the soil beneath. Then she saw it, a small patch where the earth had been recently disturbed. Kneeling carefully, she dug with her gloved fingers until they touched something smooth and cold. It was a small glass bottle. Its label faded but faintly legible: essence of lavender, parfum de Paris. The cork was sealed with wax, and beneath it the faint shimmer of powder. Miss Marple held it up to the light, her breath shallow. "So that is where the lavender grows," she thought.
"And where death was born." She wrapped it in her handkerchief and rose, her heart calm but her mind racing.
She could see it clearly now: the quiet supper, the visitor, the cup of tea left untouched. The scent of lavender too strong to be innocent. Mrs. Braithwaite had been poisoned. Gently, precisely, and by someone who knew her habits too well, someone she had trusted. And yet there was one thing that still eluded Miss Marple: the reason for Eleanor's final letter to her. Why had she chosen Miss Marple, of all people, to receive that final message? The answer, she knew, would come not in the garden, but in the silence of thought. That evening, as twilight deepened over the village, Miss Marple sat again before her small desk, the lavender bottle before her, the candle flickering low. She opened her notebook and wrote, in her fine, steady hand, Eleanor Braithwaite, deceased. Cause unknown officially, suspected poison. Suspects Geoffrey Braithwaite, possibly in debt. Dr. Lionel Crane, her physician.
Lily Parsons, the maid, unwitting accomplice?
Or a fourth party, yet unseen. Her eyes lingered on the doctor's name. He had pronounced the death too swiftly, too readily. He had dismissed inquiry, avoided detail. A man who wishes to end suspicion is often the man who fears it most. She closed the notebook, folded her hands, and whispered softly into the candlelight. And so the truth lies not merely where the lavender grows, but in who knew it was there. The candle trembled, a thin thread of wax sliding down its side. Tomorrow she would invite them all, the stepson, the doctor, the maid, and the friend, to the drawing-room of the Braithwaite estate, and under that flickering light every secret would have its turn to speak. Chapter 5. The next evening arrived cloaked in a hush that even the birds seemed to respect. A fine drizzle fell once more upon St. Mary Mead, wrapping the hedgerows in silver mist. The Braithwaite estate stood solemn and still, its windows dark but for one, the drawing-room, where light glowed faintly against the damp air like the last breath of a dying candle. Inside, Miss Marple had arranged the scene with quiet deliberation. The heavy drapes were drawn, the lamps dimmed, and in the centre of the table stood a single candle, its flame trembling in the draught that crept under the door. Around it sat 4 figures, each bearing a different shade of unease. Geoffrey Braithwaite, pale and restless. Dr. Lionel Crane, outwardly composed but with eyes too alert. Lily Parsons, twisting her handkerchief in frightened silence. And Mrs. Temple, her face drawn, her gaze uncertain. Inspector Crail stood by the fireplace, arms folded. "Well, Miss Marple," he muttered, "you've gathered quite the audience. Let's hope you know what you're doing." Miss Marple, seated with calm authority, inclined her head. "The truth, Inspector, is rather like dust."
"It settles in quiet corners until one opens the window." She let the silence breathe for a moment before she began.
"My friends," she said gently, "we are here not merely to mourn Mrs. Eleanor Braithwaite, but to understand how she met her end. The doctor has declared it a matter of the heart. I, however, believe her heart was made to stop, not by fate, but by design." A faint gasp escaped Lily's lips. Geoffrey shifted in his chair. Dr. Crane's voice was smooth, but strained.
"That is quite an accusation, Miss Marple."
"I examined her myself. There was no sign of struggle, no mark of injury." "No," Miss Marple agreed. "None visible. Poison seldom leaves such evidence. But poison, as subtle as lavender, was indeed at work." She placed upon the table the small bottle she had found in the garden. The candlelight glimmered through the glass, casting a pale violet hue. "This," she said softly, "was buried where the lavender grows."
Inside had been a mixture of oil, perfume,
"And arsenic, an old method, elegant and quiet. The scent conceals the bitterness, and a few drops in a teacup are enough to still the heart within the hour." Mrs. Temple covered her mouth in horror.
"Good heavens."
Lily began to weep.
"Oh, ma'am, I swear I only brought the tea as she told me." "I know, my dear," Miss Marple said kindly.
"You are innocent. You brought the tray, yes, but someone else prepared it." Her eyes turned to the doctor. Dr. Crane stiffened. "Are you suggesting I poisoned my patient?"
"Absurd. I've served this village 20 years.
"Indeed," said Miss Marple mildly, "and in that time you've also accumulated debts. To chemists, to creditors, and, I believe, to Mrs. Braithwaite herself." Crail glanced sharply at him. "Is that true?" Crane's jaw tightened. "A small loan, nothing more." "A loan she had lately refused to renew," Miss Marple continued softly. "You see, Eleanor confided to her friend Mrs. Temple that she had grown uneasy, that someone had been pressing her for money, and that she had discovered certain prescriptions being filled in her name. You, Doctor, had access both to her accounts and to the arsenical compounds used in medicinal tonics." Dr. Crane's composure cracked. "You have no proof—" "Oh, but I do." Miss Marple produced the handkerchief containing the lavender sprig. "The residue upon this, examined by a chemist in Marketdown, contains traces of arsenic trioxide, the same found in old-fashioned heart tonics. And who, I ask, declared her heart weak? You, Doctor." A long, heavy silence filled the room. The candle flickered wildly. Dr. Crane rose suddenly, his face white.
"This is madness. You've no right—" "Sit down, Doctor," said Inspector Crail sharply.
"We'll hear her out." Miss Marple's voice softened.
"I do not think you meant to kill her."
"Not at first. But you feared exposure, the forged prescriptions, the embezzled accounts. She threatened to reveal you. You came that night, pleaded, argued, and when persuasion failed, you offered her tea. With a few drops of your special tonic." Crane's hands trembled. "No."
"No, she insisted on the lavender perfume. She insisted," Miss Marple repeated gently, "because she suspected you."
"She wanted to test whether her fear was real. And when she tasted the bitterness beneath the lavender, she knew. That is why she wrote to me. To the one person in the village who has seen such evil before." Dr. Crane sank slowly back into his chair, his face crumpling like paper.
"She left me no choice,"
he whispered.
"She would have ruined me. My practice, my name."
Miss Marple's eyes were grave. "And so you chose instead to ruin your soul." The room remained silent for a long, heavy moment. The only sound was the faint hiss of the candle. Then Geoffrey Braithwaite spoke, his voice low, strained. "You mean to say she knew she was dying? That she wrote that letter to you after—" "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "After she realized the tea was poisoned, but before it took hold. She had perhaps 20 minutes. She used that time to write, to seal, and to send the letter by her servant to the evening post. She knew she would not live to see another dawn." Lily sobbed openly. Mrs. Temple clasped her hands in prayer. Inspector Crail straightened grimly. "Dr. Lionel Crane, you'll come with me." But Miss Marple raised a hand. "Wait, Inspector. There is one more thing." Her gaze fell upon Geoffrey. "You, Mr. Braithwaite, forged those old letters, did you not?" "The ones hidden in the Colonel's desk." Geoffrey's face blanched.
I don't know what you hope to frighten her," Miss Marple continued.
"To suggest that an old scandal might resurface, so that she'd pay you to keep it secret. But when she died, your plan died too." He stared at her, pale with fury and shame.
"How did you know?"
"Because," she said, "you imitated the handwriting, but not the soul. The Colonel never wrote in violet ink." For a moment the room seemed to exhale. Geoffrey dropped his gaze. Dr. Crane buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple extinguished the candle with a soft breath. The smoke curled upward, faint and white. "And thus," she said quietly, "the truth stands revealed by the light of lavender, and the darkness it sought to conceal. By dawn, the Braithwaite estate stood empty once more. Dr. Crane was in custody, silent and broken. Geoffrey had confessed his forgeries and fled to London, his pride as ruined as his prospects. In the garden, the lavender swayed gently in the morning breeze, the air pure again, the rain washing away the traces of poison. Miss Marple, standing by the hedge, touched the blossoms lightly. "Even beauty," she murmured, "may be deadly if it hides the truth." Inspector Crail joined her, hat in hand.
"You've done it again, Miss Marple. I'll never understand how." "It is quite simple, Inspector," she said, smiling faintly.
"Human nature does not change."
"Only the perfumes it wears." The church bell tolled in the distance, soft, solemn, forgiving. And for the first time in days, the scent of lavender smelled pure again.
Miss Marple's reflection. The day after the truth was laid bare, St. Mary Mead resumed its familiar rhythm. The milkman rattled his bottles, Mrs. Hartnell's hens clucked in the lane, and the vicar's bicycle creaked past Miss Marple's gate. To the world at large, Eleanor Braithwaite's death had become what all tragedies eventually become, a topic for quiet tea-time reflection and subdued pity. But in Miss Marple's parlour, the air held something deeper, the weight of reflection,
of empathy for the frailties that hide behind human civility. The little fire crackled in the grate.
On her writing table lay Eleanor's final letter, the lavender scent now faint, nearly gone. Miss Marple read it one last time before folding it carefully and placing it inside a small wooden box labelled Unsolved Sorrows, Remembered Truths. She reached for her diary, bound in soft leather, and began to write, her pen moving in deliberate, thoughtful strokes. "It is curious," she began, "how the heart is both frail and foolish, capable of kindness that redeems and vanity that destroys. Poor Eleanor! She was neither wicked nor weak, merely weary of the burdens others laid upon her. She saw too late that love and pity, when mingled with deceit, make the deadliest of poisons." Miss Marple paused, the candlelight dancing gently against the curve of her spectacles. "And yet, I cannot find it in myself to hate Dr. Crane. His crime was born not from malice, but from fear. Fear of disgrace, fear of ruin. Fear, in its quiet way, has sent more good men to the gallows than hate ever has. Geoffrey, too, was its victim, consumed by greed, yes, but also by the desperate desire to matter, to belong. There is no villainy quite so human as wanting to be loved." The clock on her mantel chimed softly. Outside, the night air was still. scented faintly with the last of the season's lavender. Not cloying now, but pure and thin, like a memory fading gracefully into silence. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her eyes softening.
Poor souls, she murmured.
They sought to bury their secrets where beauty bloomed, and forgot that beauty, like truth, cannot be buried forever. Her mind drifted back to Eleanor, that elegant, lonely woman who had written in Lavender Ink, whose final act had been one of courage, not despair. It comforted her to think that in death at least, Eleanor had chosen the one person who would not let her secret die unnoticed. For Miss Marple knew too well that justice did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered in a trembling candle flame, in the scent of a fading flower, in a single letter left behind. She looked toward the window, where the moonlight spilled across the sill, silvering the edges of her lace curtains. Her voice was a mere murmur now, half to herself, half to the silent ghosts of the story she had just lived. "So much suffering," she said softly, "for a handful of fear and a teaspoon of pride." Her gaze drifted to the candle on her desk, its flame bending low in the draught, and as the wick flickered and the wax slid softly down its stem, Miss Marple whispered the final truth to the quiet of her room, and as the candle burned low, another secret met its shadow. The room fell into gentle stillness, the kind that exists only in places where truth, once hidden, has finally been set free. Candlelight Mysteries channel message: if you enjoyed this story, dear listener, subscribe to Candlelight Mysteries, where every whisper hides a truth, and every flicker of flame reveals a secret long forgotten. Tonight, we walked with Miss Marple through the rain-washed gardens of St. Mary Mead, followed the scent of lavender into darkness, and uncovered the quiet despair that lingers behind civility. Here, beneath the trembling light of a single candle, another mystery found its voice.
And its silence. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember, another secret fades.
By Candlelight